Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, February 2nd. We begin the newscast tonight in Ottawa with the latest developments relating to the expansion of medically assisted death. The federal government has tabled a bill seeking to delay the expansion of medically assisted death until March of 2024. Justice Minister David Lametti tabled the bill seeking the extension this morning. In its 2021 update, the Liberal government had agreed to expand eligibility to people whose sole condition is a mental disorder. The law put a 2-year clock on the expansion, which is set to expire on March 17th. Now, that gives the Liberals 6 weeks to pass the new legislation that would add another year to the delay. Meanwhile, the Chinese government is reacting to a motion that MPs passed on Wednesday to provide asylum to persecuted Uyghurs. The CCP says the move amounts to political manipulation by Canada. MPs, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, unanimously called on Ottawa to start a refugee program which would resettle 10,000 Uyghurs fleeing persecution in China. An English translation by China's foreign ministry said Canada should stop politically manipulating Xinjiang-related issues for ulterior motives. All right, switching gears to recent updates to a high school curriculum in Ontario. Thousands of grade 11 students will now take an Indigenous course as a required English credit. This comes as Toronto District School Board trustees voted to replace the current mandatory course with one focused on Indigenous works. Board Chair Rachel Chernos-Lynn called it a meaningful step. This comes as Canada's largest school board works to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Staff have been directed to prepare a report by June detailing how and when the new required course will be rolled out at all of the TDSB's 110 secondary schools. Taking a look at Canadian auto sales now, which were up by 7.5% in January from a year earlier. Now, that's according to automotive industry research firm DesRosiers Automotive Consultants. It estimates that 98,259 new light vehicles were sold last month. DAC's managing partner, Andrew King, says the firm is hopeful that the market will keep moving forward this year. January sales results come after 2022 saw the lowest annual sales total since 2009. All right, moving to a new study which has found that Ontario saw a spike in alcohol-related healthcare visits during the first 15 months of the pandemic. Data from Research Institute ICES found a 22% jump in visits to physicians and family doctors, psychiatrists, and addiction medicine specialists. This was from March 2020 to May 2021. Those accessing services were people with a history of alcohol problems, as well as those confronting drinking issues for the first time. The study is published in the Canadian Journal of Public Health. On the West Coast, 5 RCMP officers have been charged in the death of an Indigenous man in police custody in British Columbia more than 5 years ago. 35-year-old Arthur Culver was arrested in Prince George on July 18, 2017. A report from BC's police watchdog said there was a struggle during the arrest, which resulted in other officers being called and pepper spray being used. The BC Prosecution Service announced yesterday that 2 Mounties have been charged with manslaughter, while 3 others are facing obstruction charges. Turning to recent moves in Alberta, where sheriffs are being designated to help the Edmonton Police Service keep order in central parts of the city for the next 15 weeks. The United Conservative Party government says the pilot project is part of a public safety initiative. This comes as the city deals with widespread crime, homelessness, addictions, and mental health problems. Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis says the problems are prompting businesses and people to leave the downtown area. Nestle Canada says it is winding down its frozen meals and pizza business in the country over the next 6 months. The 4 brands that will no longer be sold in the freezer aisle at Canadian grocery stores are Delissio, Stouffer's, Lean Cuisine, and Life Cuisine. The company says it is focusing on categories that support long-term business growth. This includes confectionery, coffee, ice cream, premium water, and pet food. All right, well, back in BC, an Indigenous house post is being returned to a First Nation in the province. This comes 138 years after it was chopped down and sold. Missionaries ordered the house post taken down and then sold from the Gita Katla Nation on BC's northern coast. After being on display at a museum, it ended up packed away in storage for decades. The 3-meter tall house post depicts a grizzly bear of the sea and her cubs. It is expected to arrive in Prince Rupert next month. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at music rights and investing. We'll be right back. Justin Bieber's record-breaking pop hits from Baby to Sorry are no longer his. This comes after the superstar sold the rights to his early career music. Nearly 300 works, including 6 of the pop star's albums, have been sold to a music investment company called Hipgnosis. The deal covers Justin Bieber's publishing rights, copyright ownership, and all rights to music he's recorded since his early career started when he was 13. The deal reportedly cost $200 million, which is one of the biggest sales for a musician as young as Bieber, who is 28 years old. Hitmakers like Sting, Bob Dylan, and Shakira have also sold their music catalogs in recent years. Well, joining us now to talk more on how music is shifting into the world of investment is Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, you look like you're ready to sell your own top music hit right now.
Oh, Dean, sorry, I didn't see you there. Glad to be here. I think I may as well start practicing. If Bieber can sell for $200 million at age of 28, at 52, I don't think it's too late for me.
Never too late, Brendan. Now, getting into these sales, why do you think singers are selling their music, even though they're making extraordinary amounts of money? Why do you think they're selling their music in the first place?
Well, what they're doing, and this is how I think it applies to people, is they're turning, when they work to perform, when they're actually out there on stage, they're getting paid to play. But when they sell their catalog, they're actually getting an asset. They're monetizing this asset. And it's a question of when to do it, what part of their career to do it, and how much is enough. So at 28 years old, if he can sell the rights to his music for $200 million, it's a pretty good start for a boy from Stratford, Ontario.
A great start indeed, Brendan. Now, can you walk us through what exactly these musicians are selling when it comes to their property?
Well, there's really 2 parts to it. There's the part that the writer gets, and then there's the part that the producer gets. Now, new artists, say T Swift, when she's doing her first albums, she gets the right for the music that she composes. So that's all hers. But the right to the actual production tends to be with the production company. So I think her first 5 albums or something like that, the production company got all the rights. So what Taylor Swift is doing right now is going through and re-recording all of her original material because her production non-re-record contract ran out a couple of years ago. So she, in theory, can re-record all her own songs and get both the production rights and the writer's rights as a piece.
All right, Brendan. Now, another thing to consider here is why buyers are investing in music in the first place as well. What led to this sort of spike in interest in music?
Well, the legendary story from over 40 years ago was when Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson were hanging out, and Paul said, Michael, you really should look at our catalog, because the Beatles famously hadn't actually sold any of their music for commercial purposes. So what did Michael Jackson do? He went out and bought the rights to market the Beatles' work, and then it's popped up in commercials and things. So he monetized that asset. In the modern era, there are so many venues where the standards, from the Drifters Under the Boardwalk to Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber's work, can be released and used in movies and on the internet and everywhere. So if you are a musician in the business of making music, it makes sense to sell to someone who's in the business of marketing music if you do it for enough money.
All right, Brendan. Well, looking ahead, how do you see this sort of evolving in the near future? Could investing in music become the new norm, like cryptocurrency? And if so, what could this look like for the everyday investor?
The difference, Nima, is that cryptocurrency is some ephemeral thing in the ether, but rock and roll is real. Why it's being done right now is that right now, musicians can sell their catalog and claim it as a capital gain. Biden, who is no fan of rock music, as far as I can tell, is thinking of changing the tax treatment so it would come back into income. So the reason you're seeing a flourish of it right now is that there's a window here for certainly American artists to capitalize on their catalogs and make maximum dollars and pay minimum tax. And you're right, royalties of all sorts, including music, are a part of the investment world, and I think can be a bigger part of it going forward.
Always some great insight, Brendan. Looking forward to your next music hit. I'll be sure to listen to that.
Thank you, Nima. I got to get practicing though. Appreciate the time.
All right, stay with us. After the break, we're going to return to the world of finance with our weekly market update by Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, as she gives us her outlook on how the markets have behaved this past week. Of course, after that, we'll have today's top international headlines to share. So stick around. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Now it's time for our weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing U.S. markets mostly higher today, and this does follow a rally yesterday on the back of the U.S. Federal Reserve raising rates by 25 basis points as expected. The market's takeaway from the meeting was dovish, hence the market rallied. But Fed Chair Jerome Powell is still maintaining somewhat of a hawkish stance by saying he really wants to make sure he's got evidence that inflation is on a sustained downward path. So market's interpretation is dovish and a rally, and that's what we're seeing continue today. But be aware that the U.S. Federal Reserve, again, wants to maintain their stance that inflation has got to continue to decline. Importantly as well, just to put this in perspective, they raised rates by 25 basis points. In December, it was 50, and prior to that, they did 4 raises of 75 basis points. So certainly they are pulling back on that rate hike tightening aspect, which has, of course, tightened up financial markets and also, of course, caused a lot of volatility. Away from that, though, again, we'll continue to hear how they interpret the data points as it relates to the economy and the outlook. So hearing a lot from various central bankers, the Fed yesterday, and of course today we had the ECB as well as the BOE, so ECB, European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, both raising rates by 50 basis points. So again, still a lot of focus on what the central banks are doing and to what degree and how that therefore impacts the markets. Away from that, in terms of what we are seeing working in the markets today in the United States, it is big tech, really led by Facebook or Meta, the new name. They did report their numbers after the closing bells yesterday. They beat revenue by 2%, so not a lot there. But importantly, they did cut their expense guidance as well as their CapEx to the tune of about in the billions of dollars, and that is causing the stock to rally today, up by about 20%. They said that 2023 is the year of efficiency. So investors obviously pleased with that kind of mindset in terms of cutting the expenses and the CapEx. Away from that, just on the economic data front, I would point out that the initial jobless claims in the United States came in lower than expected, so that's a good thing. And actually the lowest initial jobless claims in 9 months. On the economic front as well, though, the factory orders reported did come in below consensus. So again, there's still a bit of a question mark in terms of the strength of the U.S. economy, and of course that dovetails into the Canadian economy as well. In terms of just stepping back, we are in the midst of U.S. earnings season, Canadian earnings season, I'll get to in a second. That's also picking up. But we've only seen about 70% of the U.S. companies beat the consensus numbers. So somewhat underwhelming, but the stock reaction has been quite good. And that's because the bar has been set so low. So you are seeing these reports come out and stocks finding some strength or some rallying. Also, of course, when you listen to the company management calls, the companies are saying that the input costs are declining, supply chain constraints are improving, and they're also, of course, continuing to focus on profitability. So taken all together, you're actually seeing pretty good reactions in the market on the back of the earnings results, despite them being somewhat underwhelming. Today is a big day for U.S. earnings. Eli Lilly, Merck, as well as Hershey's all reporting this morning. But after the close, keep your eyes out for Amazon, Apple, Google, and Starbucks. So big earnings day in the United States. Shifting over to Canada, the TSX is trading a little bit lower, or a little bit unchanged today. It was lower yesterday. We are seeing WTI pull back a little bit. OPEC Plus is going to be, those OPEC Plus producers are going to be keeping their output unchanged, their output levels unchanged. So we'll wait and see what happens next there and the impact that will have on the price of WTI. But bottom line, when people look at WTI, the view is that we have increasing demand, specifically with respect to China reopening, and we have not increased supply for a decade. It is somewhat quiet here in the Canadian headline aspect, but we are seeing earnings pick up. BCE did have a slight earnings miss. They did, however, raise their dividend by 5.2%. Canada Goose came in less than expected on the earnings front, perhaps quite disappointing there. And Rogers had a better than expected fourth quarter earnings results, $1.09 versus 99 cents expected from the consensus numbers. Profit jumping 25%, fueled by their wireless business. So some good results there. Nima, a lot to watch. Again, it's front and center as it relates to earnings. We'll keep you posted. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. Stay with us. When we come back from the break, we've got more news from around the world, so stay tuned. Forum Daily will be back shortly. The European Central Bank has hiked interest rates by another half point and vows a similar hike at its next meeting. ECB President Christine Lagarde says the bank knows the fight to bring down inflation won't be done beyond an intended hike in March. The bank is aggressively raising rates to fight inflation that has slowed but is still at 8.5% annually. The move comes as the Bank of England also hikes its key rate by half a point a day. This comes after the U.S. Federal Reserve opted for a smaller quarter-point increase. All right, moving to the latest on NATO expansion efforts. The prime ministers of Finland and Sweden have reaffirmed their intent to have the two countries join the alliance at the same time. A Quran burning and other recent demonstrations in Sweden have infuriated the Turkish government, which already had held off approving the joint NATO application from the Nordic nations. All right, well, meanwhile, the United States and the Philippines have announced an expansion of America's military presence in the Southeast Asian country. U.S. forces will be granted access to 4 more military camps, which effectively gives Washington new ground to ramp up deterrence against China. The agreement between the longtime allies was made public on Thursday. It was during the visit of U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He has led efforts to strengthen America's security alliances in Asia. This comes in the face of China's increasing assertiveness toward Taiwan and territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Next door in Pakistan, a provincial police chief is releasing more information on a suicide bomber who killed 101 people and wounded over 200 others at a mosque on Monday. The official says that the bomber disguised himself by wearing a police uniform, and the guards at the site assumed that he was their colleague and did not search him. The bomber has been identified, and police say they are close to arresting the network that was behind one of the deadliest attacks in Peshawar. Well, amid deadly outbreaks of cholera in Africa, the Public Health Agency says many of the continent's countries have no immediate access to vaccines. The acting director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the agency is working with the World Health Organization and Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, on ways to get more vaccine doses. Since the start of the year, Africa has seen more than 27,000 new cases of cholera. This includes 687 deaths, most of them in the southern country of Malawi. Global energy giant Shell says its adjusted earnings doubled to a record high of $39.9 billion US last year. This comes as oil and gas prices soared following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. London-based Shell also announced that it's raising its dividend payment by shareholders by 15%, and it's buying back $4 billion worth of shares. Investment Director Russ Mould at AJ Bell calls the results truly stunning. All right, switching gears to a new poll, which shows that more American adults disapprove than approve of the way the president has handled the discovery of classified documents at his Delaware home and a former Washington office. Yet that seems to have had little impact on Joe Biden's overall approval rating. The new poll from the Associated Press finds that 41% of Americans say they approve of how Mr. Biden is handling his job as president. Now, that's about the same as the 43% who said that in December. Meanwhile, the FBI is now investigating a New York congressman who has admitted to fabricating portions of his resume. George Santos has faced numerous calls for his resignation, and he is already facing multiple investigations by prosecutors over his personal and campaign finances, as well as lies that he told about his resume and family background. Mr. Santos recently stepped away from House committee assignments to deal with these investigations. Moving to a high-profile arrest in France, where an Italian mob suspect has been taken into police custody after 16 years on the run. Interpol says 63-year-old Edgardo Greco was arrested in Saint-Étienne, where he had been living since 2014. He is wanted for 2 murders in 2006 and accused of attempted murder in another case. Interpol said the killings were part of a mafia war that happened in Italy in the early 1990s. Well, it could be an early spring this year, or not, depending on which groundhog you follow. Ontario's Wyerton Willie has called for an early spring. This while Nova Scotia's famous groundhog, Shubhanagri Sam, apparently saw her shadow this morning and went back into her enclosure north of Halifax. Pennsylvania's famous Punxsutawney Phil came out of his burrow in Gobbler's Knob and also saw his shadow. Now, according to folklore, if a groundhog sees its shadow on Groundhog Day, winter will drag on. I choose to follow Wyerton Willie. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.